you all for being here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Angaza, and maybe start with my story and then go into the company, but definitely leave the majority of the time for Q&A. So as I talk in the beginning, think of any questions that you might have for me, because I definitely want to make this conversation mostly about what you're interested in. A little bit about me. Thank you for the wonderful intro. I was an undergrad here at Stanford almost 10 years ago. Crazy how time flies. I actually had a class in this very room, so it's great to be back. Angaza, in its very early days, was actually born out of the design school. There's a class some of you may be aware of called Extreme Affordability, which is really focused on using the human-centered design process to design products or services for emerging markets, where a lot of the design constraints are very different than if you were to design products for the US or European market. So that was really the initial inspiration for Angaza. We definitely went through a lot of business model iterations to get where we are today, as is startup life. But it's kind of a fun concept to know that our roots were really from Stanford. So let me give you just a brief overview of what we do, and then I want to show you a short video which can explain it a lot better than I can. But we are focused on making energy affordable for off-grid consumers around the world. You can just go to the next slide. So this is a very typical image that you will see in off-grid Africa or off-grid India. Most off-grid families light their homes at night by burning kerosene. They don't have access to the power grid, so basically kerosene is really the only option for a light source. And it sucks in a lot of different ways. Kerosene is extremely dim. It's very toxic to the health, so the World Bank estimates that using kerosene every night is equivalent to smoking 2 packs of cigarettes every day. Sorry, it's on this timer.
Yeah.
Cool.
Maybe that'll stop it.
And it's extremely expensive. So a typical off-grid family, at least in East Africa, will actually spend up to 20% of their income just to buy kerosene. So they're literally burning their hard-earned income on this really inferior light source. The other thing that kerosene doesn't do is charge cell phones or power radios. And a lot of off-grid families have cell phones and radios, and they have to pay, on top of what they're already paying for kerosene, they have to pay for a cell phone charge or for disposable batteries for their radio. So overall, off-grid consumers are actually paying the most for inferior energy sources. And we wanted to change that. We wanted to make high-quality, clean, reliable solar energy actually financially accessible to this off-grid consumer base. How do we do that? Essentially, you can go, yeah, perfect. So let me explain a concept called a solar home system. I'll actually pass this around. So a typical solar home system, these are products designed for off-grid consumers. They consist of a small sort of micro solar panel. This is a 6-watt panel. They typically come with multiple overhead LED lights. And then there's some sort of battery box, which can also charge cell phones. So this is one of the most popular products that you'll find sold in off-grid markets like East Africa. And it's really designed, like I said, for the needs of an off-grid family. So that's really lighting, cell phone charging. This can even power USB radios. If you know anything about US consumer solar, Sunrun, Solar City, or just any solar panel that you see on a home in the US, those solar panels are very huge. So you might be sort of surprised to think that a family can actually live off of a 6-watt solar panel. And the reason is because this is really sort of, basic replacement for kerosene, entry level to the energy needs of an off-grid home. And then over time, as they actually start to get access to more energy, you size up the solar panel and you might be able to then power TVs and refrigerators off of these solar home systems. So going into what Angaza does specifically, we focus on the financing for these systems. So if you look at how much an off-grid family is spending overall or even on a weekly basis, let's say a typical East African family might spend $2 per week on kerosene and cell phone charging. It's very rare that an off-grid family will actually have $100 of cash in hand at one time to be able to buy a product like this outright. But if you can actually spread out the cost of a product over time such that they actually pay less on a weekly basis than they're used to spending on kerosene, then you can make it a total no-brainer to allow them to switch from kerosene to solar. So we call this type of technology pay-as-you-go solar. It's exactly what it sounds like. Essentially, we are enabling these families to pay $1.50 per week for solar energy rather than $2 per week that they're used to spending on kerosene. And we do that with technology. So why don't we go ahead and play the video. This is about a 4-minute video, but I think it'll be really helpful for you to see some of the just scenes that we see in off-grid Africa and learn more about how we actually are solving the problem. I think there are many approaches you can take to lifting people out of poverty, but if you solve the energy problem, you solve so many other problems. There are still over 1 billion people around the world that don't have access to grid electricity, which means that they're using basically jet fuel every night to burn for a source of light. Solar is the best form of energy. It's clean, it's more reliable than grid. We were originally designing and manufacturing high-quality solar products, but again and again we were realizing that these products were just prohibitively expensive for the off-grid customers that needed them the most. So we were faced with an option. We could strip out functionality and quality from a product, or we could actually find a way to make these products financially affordable to off-grid consumers. We took a lot of inspiration from the way the mobile industry has grown. In the past 10 years, sub-Saharan Africa went from a state of no connectivity to a state where everyone is connected through their mobile phone. The mobile industry has completely leapfrogged landlines because consumers were able to buy phones at a very cheap price and to buy airtime little by little. We thought, hey, why don't we just do the same thing with solar energy? Let's make solar more affordable in exactly the same way they purchase prepaid airtime. And that's what led us to this innovative pay-as-you-go financing technology. Families are used to spending up to 20% of their income to purchase kerosene. So solar becomes a no-brainer because once you actually finish your solar payments, the product is yours. It's a rent-to-own model. And then solar becomes free energy from the sun. In 2012, we won the Tech Awards for our pay-as-you-go solar products. And we just realized that if we wanted to impact 100 million people, 1 billion people, we needed to transition from a business-to-consumer model to a business-to-business model and focus directly on designing and developing the pay-as-you-go technology platform and then offer the pay-as-you-go software to distributors. And that's how we were going to get these products to off-grid consumers.
The Angaza pay-as-you-go model transformed our business completely. By using the Angaza Activator app, the energy officer registers the customer. After he or she has made the payment, the customer gets a key code from Angaza. For every amount paid, the customer is given an equivalent number of days. Once the days run out, the lamp automatically goes off. At that point, the client has to make another payment. Through the use of the Angaza Energy Hub, I am able to see the performance of all the energy officers and all the clients. We are all earning more money and accessing more clients. Families that have adopted the solar energy, the money she saves from not buying kerosene, she can use to pay school fees for the kids, and she can use to improve the diet of the family. It's fulfillment to me as an individual that I've made an impact.
I'm super excited to see how this industry has grown in the last only 3 years and where it's going to grow in the next 10 years and 20 years. Pay-as-you-go has completely transformed the off-grid energy industry. There's a whole new market emerging, and it's amazing to see how many jobs have been created from solar distribution. We're growing exponentially. Right now we're working in over 10 countries.
we're really excited to build a truly global technology platform that's really going to solve this need on a global scale.
Cool, thank you. So you saw a little bit about what off-grid life is like. You saw a little bit about the technology that we build at Angaza to help solve this upfront price barrier for solar. I want to break that down a little bit because it was kind of confusing in terms of what all this technology does. Essentially, the first piece of it is you have to think about when a distributor is extending financing to an end consumer who is off-grid. That family or that individual probably doesn't have a bank account, and they probably don't have any sort of credit history with any financial institution. So how does a distributor actually know that they should give that loan to the end consumer? Often they don't. Often they're taking a risk. And the reason that they take this risk, stand a little bit outside. That's better, okay. The reason that they take this risk is that there's an embedded metering technology inside of these solar home systems. Essentially, it makes it a smart product. So as you saw in the video, when a customer makes a payment, they get a key code and they type that key code into the product, and that's how the product knows how many days to activate. So a customer might pay for 7 days at a time. They type a key code in for 7 days. Some customers with more buying power might buy 30 days at a time, and the key code that they receive is for 30 days. So basically, if they don't pay, the product doesn't work, and that incentive gets consumers to continue to pay. So that's something that exists in the off-grid solar industry that doesn't exist in microfinance, for example. Microfinance has been around for decades. It's really sort of hailed as a life-changing product for many low-income individuals. But microfinance, typically consumers receiving microfinance loan go through a lot of vetting. Sometimes they actually are banked. They're just sort of more known to the distributor. With this embedded metering technology, distributors can literally offer solar products to anyone. The other piece of what you saw is essentially a mobile app that sales agents use to sell these products, where they collect client data, they can actually follow up on payments, they can track their own commissions. Some of those individuals you saw fully branded in those yellow hat and t-shirts, that's called a sales agent. In most emerging markets, physical products are sold through networks of sales agents that are literally human beings going door to door, knocking on the door saying, hey, this is a solar product, this is the benefit to you, do you want to buy it? So sales in emerging markets, and specifically rural areas of emerging markets, are very, they rely a lot on interpersonal relationships. So that sales agent might be a friend or family member, someone who is actually known in the village. And if someone you know comes knocking on your door and says, hey, you should buy this solar product, it will change your life, you're likely to trust that person. So those are those individuals that you saw dressed in yellow, and they use our mobile app to actually run their own solar sales business. The other piece of what you saw is basically a web portal for distributors to be able to manage their pay-as-you-go operations. One thing I didn't mention is there are actually 1.2 billion off-grid individuals around the world that live off-grid. And if you're going to create a technology and just an operational model that can scale to billions, rather than just thousands or hundreds of thousands, you really need technology in place to scale systems, eliminate human error, eliminate fraud. So a lot of what we do at Angaza is basically software development to provide the tools to solar distributors so they can run pay-as-you-go operations at scale. I guess let me talk a little bit about the company for those of you interested in entrepreneurship in general and specifically social entrepreneurship. We consider ourselves a social enterprise. Certainly we have a social mission. We measure our social impact. But the beauty of our business model is that when Angaza makes money, we make a social impact, and we're never making a decision where it's a trade-off of one versus the other. So we're a for-profit company. We've raised traditional equity funding from pretty traditional investors who invest in any sort of other Silicon Valley startup. And they believe that we can scale and provide them the financial returns that any other startup they invest in would. But a lot of them are attracted to us as a social enterprise because they know that we're actually having a massive impact on the world. And when I started Angaza about 7 years ago, I think social entrepreneurship as a term was still pretty new. A lot of people didn't really know what a social entrepreneur was. It's interesting, we just bonded over the fact that we're Echoing Green Fellows, and Echoing Green Fellowship is basically a fellowship for social entrepreneurs. But if you look at the history of Echoing Green, the entrepreneurs that came into their door for decades were all nonprofit. At some point about 10, 15 years ago, they started seeing for-profit business models walk into their door, basically for-profit companies saying, hey, we have a social mission, but we're going to make money doing it. Now what Echoing Green sees is the majority of the companies that walk in their door are for-profit. And I think it just really speaks to the type of funding that's more available for social enterprises, and the fact that a lot of social enterprises have sort of walked the talk and scaled and made a huge impact and made financial returns for their investors. So that's just a little bit about sort of our philosophy at Angaza. Happy to talk any way, if it's interesting, about just the evolution of the company. I think I'll go ahead and turn it over to Q&A. So we can talk about what you guys are interested in. Yes?
Besides the sales agents that you have going home to home, how do you market the product, or the several products, I should say? What's your main form of marketing?
Yeah, I think I
maybe
actually...
like talk a little bit, well, we
Yeah.
about
this
how
one.
the whole model works.
Yeah, yeah, I
Who's
think
your
I-
customer and
I skipped this very important point.
different
What is Angaza's business model?
levels and
Yeah.
a multi-level thing.
Yeah, exactly. So you can think of basically there are multiple actors to make this whole ecosystem work. There are manufacturers of the products. So the product that's being passed around somewhere, you probably saw Sun King branding on that product. Sun King is one of the manufacturers that specifically produce off-grid solar products. They are one of our manufacturing partners. So Angaza, we don't manufacture products, we just partner with manufacturers, and we license the design of that embedded metering and monitoring technology to the manufacturers. So you can't see it, but inside of this product, we make the product smart with this metering technology. So there's Angaza technology inside of it. The other actor that's important to understand here is a solar distributor. So like I said, a solar distributor is really managing that network of sales agents who are paid on commission. They're not often salaried employees of that distributor, but sales agents are really the lifeblood of rural distribution. And the distributor, the one actually using our web portal to look at all of their operations in aggregate, they're recruiting those sales agents, training those sales agents, and retaining those sales agents over time so they can just increase the number of sales that that distributor has. So the distributor is really Angaza's customer because we sell our software to distributors. So our business model, to sum up, is actually a B2B business model. We're not the company out there, building up these distribution networks to sell products onto end consumers. We're the company that's focused on building that technology and providing that technology to those various actors in the supply chain: manufacturers, distributors, and sales agents. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we're really impacting the end consumer who's buying the product and paying for solar over time. But Angaza doesn't touch that end consumer directly.
So you sell, I mean, it sounds like you're selling like different things to different people. So do you get paid by Sun King for the technology? Okay. And you get paid like per unit that they sell?
Yeah, so we have two revenue streams.
Okay.
We get paid by the manufacturer when they license our embedded metering technology. And most of our revenue actually comes from the distributors paying for our software. And they pay a per unit per year fee. So it's actually pretty similar to a lot of software as a service companies, if you're familiar with that model. But essentially distributors that are using our software much more, so they're selling higher volumes of products, they're paying proportionally more for our software than distributors that are selling lower volumes of products each month. But at the end of the day, our core customer are those distribution businesses around the world. Currently, that video said we work in 10 countries. We actually work in 30 countries now. It's a little bit outdated. We work with about 150 distributors across the world. That might seem crazy. How can we work in so many different countries? At the end of the day, it's deploying cloud-based software and figuring out how to remotely train and provide customer support to these distributors, which is not an easy task, but it's a decision that we made from day one at the company. Was off-grid markets exist everywhere. Manufacturers want to sell these solar products everywhere, so we need to be able to support the software distribution everywhere. Our sort of country list is growing out of control because these type of distributors exist all over the world. Yeah.
So I have two questions. First, what's the value of the actual products, like the solar panel and the machine? And second, what happens if people stop making their payments, the machine turns off, but they still have that kind of fixed cost of the product in their home?
Yeah, so I'll take this product for example. Where is it? Still somewhere here? Hopefully you all got to see it and hold it. So this is actually one of the most popular products that distributors sell. This one retails for about $150 paid over 12 months. However, that's a total general statement because distributors have the flexibility to price the product however they want. So this particular product in Kenya, it might go for $150 over 12 months. In Ghana, it might go for $300 over 3 years. So typically, thank you. Typically, distributors do price the weekly payment in comparison to what a family in that market might be spending on other energy expenditures, such that it is more of a no-brainer to transition to solar. To answer your other question,
What happens if it turns off, like that fixed cost?
Yes. So basically, if the product turns off, usually it turns off and that's the cue to the customer that they should pay again. If it turns off and the customer is never going to pay again, over a certain amount of time, if they stop payments altogether, they're considered a defaulted customer or defaulted loan. And most distributors actually, depends on the size and value of the product, but most distributors try to recapture that asset, actually go out and take it back, refurbish it and resell it. Because there is value in that asset sitting there, and if a consumer isn't going to pay, they'll probably take $5 to give back. They'll take $5 and give back the physical product. The video mentioned this, but most product loans are rent to own. So once the consumer actually hits that $150 price point, for example, that last key code that they receive will unlock the product forever, and they don't have to continue to make any further payments. So they're paying towards ownership. And what that means is if you actually see a lot of different types of payment trends. Some consumers take longer than that 12 months to pay just because they have less buying power. Some consumers might pay off that loan in 6 months because they're making larger payments at a time. They have more buying power. So it's truly pay as you go. I mean, you only get energy when you pay for it. But you can really learn a lot about the market and about just customer appetite for energy, looking at those payment patterns. It's really interesting. Yeah.
Can you talk more about starting a company and why you decided to in the first place?
Yeah. So I wouldn't say I woke up one day and I was like, I want to start a company. Definitely didn't happen like that. So initially in that class, like I described at the design school, I was working with an off-grid solar manufacturer. Their name is D-Light. You might have heard of them. They were also Stanford born. And they were really sort of posing the question to our student team at the time, hey, we think we're making great products. Why aren't they flying off the shelf? So we started looking a little bit at just the upfront price barrier of solar. This was back in 2009. I went and got a real job, worked for a design consultancy in the Bay Area, but on the side for about 2 years, I continued to work on the project that started out of that class. So I was traveling using all my vacation time, traveling and living in rural Tanzania, testing prototypes with customers, just sort of thinking about what kind of solutions exist here. Finally one day at my real job, I was like, I can't keep doing this on nights and weekends. I either have to stop doing this or I need to actually do something about this full time. And it was at that point that I made the decision to, quit my job, start a company. I have 2 co-founders we've all been together from the beginning. It certainly wasn't, smooth sailing in the beginning. Kind of the first step for entrepreneurship is you have to raise money. It's hard to raise money when you don't have much traction and you're kind of an idea on paper. So getting that first, seed round done was kind of a slog. But after we sort of started to prove out our idea, we started actually signing on customers. we were proving that off-grid consumers were actually pay for solar in this way and would continue to pay for solar in this way, the pieces sort of started, coming together. So I say all this to sort of shatter your mindset, like it's not like it happens overnight. Entrepreneurship is tough. You go through a lot of things that won't work. But really in the beginning, if I think about why did I start a company, it was because I was so passionate about an idea that I couldn't sit still and not pursue it. And I think that's what you have to be passionate about if you're going to start a company and go through all the downs in addition to the ups. Yeah.
So once a product is like paid for by the consumer and they own it, does Angaza still make money if like the software is not being used to like turn it on and off?
Yeah, great question. So no, we don't make money off of supporting that first unit, but what we do is try to upsell another unit to that same consumer. So one thing you didn't really see in the video is that our technology platform has evolved from just being for in-user financing for solar lighting to now in-user financing for all types of products. We call these products life-changing products. So essentially solar lighting, clean cook stoves, smartphones, solar water pumps. All of these products there's huge consumer demand for, but the consumer demand is from off-grid, low-income consumers who can't afford them. So our platform is now financing all types of these products, and that client relationship between distributor and client, when I say client, that's end user, that relationship extends far beyond just the first sale of that first product. So you're now seeing a lot of distributors sell either larger solar home systems or solar water pumps or even bundle smartphones into that loan. So a lot of creativity going on, but at the end of the day, it's creating that long-term relationship with the client, not just the first loan, but beyond that. I guess I'll sort of extend your question to one thing that Angaza is thinking a lot about is what do we do with all this data? Off-grid consumers are pretty largely misunderstood. Most large corporations sort of write off the bottom 2 billion consumers in the world saying, this consumer class has no money. Why should we focus our business efforts on that population? But what we're trying to do is actually, we have a very rich data set on this consumer base. So we're looking at demographic information of these consumers. We're looking at payment trends. Not with this product in particular, but some of the products we actually embed GSM modules directly into the product. So it kind of acts like a cell phone. We can remotely talk back and forth to that product. We can collect usage and diagnostic data back from products. So you're seeing basically a lot of different types of data coming together to give us a really accurate picture of who these consumers are, what their credit risk is, what might be the next product that they would want. And we're leveraging that data to actually sort of packetize it into predictive insights that distributors can use to run their operations. So distributors, based on that data, are getting a lot smarter about who they should sell to, when they should do marketing pushes, when they should consider that a customer has defaulted to go recollect that asset. And it's just bringing a lot of insight into a market and distribution channels that have been really largely overlooked. So that's pretty interesting, putting a lot of people on the map for the first time. Okay.
How do you deal with maintenance? Because I know that's a big struggle in a lot of rural areas.
Yeah, so Angaza doesn't deal with that specifically, our distributors do. Most high quality products come with a 2 to 3 year warranty. So within that warranty period, if anything goes wrong with the product, the consumer knows they can go back to the distributor and exchange it or get it repaired. We choose our distributors wisely actually and make sure that they have some maintenance program in place so these consumers aren't going to be stranded and not be able to get their product fixed. But it's certainly a challenge in rural markets because it's expensive to move products from point A to point B, and even sending a technician out to fix a product is expensive. This is actually an interesting area that our data comes into play again, because those GSM products, like I mentioned, we can actually track diagnostic data from that product, so we can tell how many hours per day it's charging, what the battery capacity is like, And using that remotely collected diagnostic data, we can actually tell a distributor, should you send a solar technician out to fix that product? Or is it just human error? Maybe it's only charging for 4 hours a day because they installed it under a tree. And in that case, it's just an easy phone call to the consumer to say, make sure your solar panel's in the sun, rather than, pay $15 to send a technician out to fix a product that's not broken. So that's also where the data gets really exciting. Any other questions?
How'd you come up with the name Angaza?
We used Google Translate and thought of a lot of English words, and then looked up their Swahili translation. I'm not joking. It's a very messy process. Angaza is a Swahili word that means to illuminate. We didn't really have the foresight in the beginning of the company's life that we would extend beyond lighting at some point. We thought we would be, a strict lighting company, so we wanted a name that reflected that. And we also didn't have the foresight to realize we'd be in many countries that aren't Swahili speaking. But the name has stuck. Yeah.
So you mentioned that it's really important to choose distributors wisely. So what is your criteria for choosing distributors, especially when there can be the possibility for corruption in selling products to people who obviously can't afford them, and repoing the products when people don't pay?
Well, I think a lot of this just relates to market dynamics, like in the incentive structure. So why would a distributor repossess a product, spend money to do that repossession if the consumer is still paying? So there are certain just like inherent forces that eliminate corruption in many senses. We do just learn as much about the distributor to make sure they're not involved in any shady business practices. We ask questions like, how are your sales agents commissioned? Like how many employees do you have? What kind of traction do you have in the market? Typically, if they're a very new company and they have no sales and they're just like, I want to be a solar distributor, we typically don't work with them because there's not a lot of data out there to suggest that they're going to be successful, that they're actually going to provide good consumer support if the product breaks. So a lot of what we rely on is just that historical performance of a distributor. You guys are quiet today.
I have 2 questions. Let's first just picking up on what you were just talking about. When you go into a new area, how do you act? So I understand, most of the interaction with the distributor customers is like remote and all that. But when you go into a new area, or even when you go into a completely new market area, how do you actually make contact and communicate with prospective new distributor customers?
Yeah, so a lot of, we have a sales and marketing team, and so, we sort of localize our sales and marketing process for specific regions or languages. But most of our distribution customers are actually introduced to us by our manufacturing partners.
Okay.
So a lot of our manufacturers, like Sun King, have been selling these products in many countries, and they've built up these distributor relationships. And now they're introducing the concept of pay-as-you-go to these distributors, and that's where Angaza comes in. So we get to sort of piggyback on the fact that these manufacturers and these distributors already have a working relationship. This actually goes to your question too. We rely on our manufacturers to sort of vet our distributors as well. I would say though, we've had to figure out things like localization of the software in terms of language. We put technical resources into making it very easy to translate the mobile app into a local language, or that hub, the web portal that you saw, into a local language. Another challenge we have is that our customer support team is based in Nairobi, English and Swahili speaking, and we work with distributors in West Africa, which speak French. So we're getting support tickets in French to our Nairobi team. We're like, what do? Google Translate. Apparently Google Translate is great. We can literally translate a support ticket into English, answer it, translate it back into French, and provide good enough customer support to our distributors. Will it scale? I don't know. Ask me in 2 years. But we've sort of had to be creative in that sense, working across so many different geographies. Yeah.
What's sort of preventing the distributors and the manufacturers from just cutting you guys out, right?
what's preventing them from putting in the exact same type of software solution and then doing the exact same type of transaction and not having to pay you guys?
It's hard, it's expensive, and they're not software companies. Essentially, and this is where we need to think about our pricing. Like, if we were charging these businesses millions of dollars, it would make much more sense for them to hire up a software team and try and build the software themselves. But we don't. We actually charge small per unit fees that get them to market in a matter of minutes, and allows them to actually digitize their entire, business operations using the technology. So as long as we're continuing to provide value to them based on the price that they're paying, they're not even thinking about going down the route. And these are like operational distributors. They have no IT staff at all. They don't have software engineers. It's taken many millions of dollars and many years to build this kind of technology. So. Suddenly,
There's always more questions.
Good.
So it seems like kind of the target audience right now are like individual households. And are there other products that are targeted to bigger establishments like firms or businesses in these countries?
Yeah, other solar products. Yeah, certainly. So this is actually one of about 20 products that we work with. We work with products smaller than this and products much larger than that. You just see sort of a segmentation in terms of like different tiers of buying power, buying different size products. So the larger products that you're referring to, they typically are sold in peri-urban or urban areas. But often they do use our technology and have that same sort of financing because they're too prohibitively expensive upfront. So a good example of this is in Nigeria. The grid in Nigeria is much more expansive than it is in Kenya. And we see distributors actually selling larger solar home systems to on-grid customers in urban areas. But grid reliability is pretty terrible in Nigeria. They get 2 to 4 hours of power per day. So they've actually transitioned to using solar energy as their primary energy source, and the grid becomes backup. So that's just one interesting example of a market-specific trend that we're seeing. But yeah, certainly we work with a really wide range of products. Some of the larger products too, distributors choose not to sell them rent to own and instead to sell them in a payment and perpetuity plan, basically making it like grid electricity or making the payment like grid electricity. And we also support that kind of model. This is for products that are many thousands of dollars though, rather than $100. One thing I didn't mention, which maybe some of you might find interesting, is how these payments are actually made. Because these clients, they don't have bank accounts, they don't have credit cards, they need to figure out, or we need to figure out a way for them to easily send their weekly solar payment. So what we do is actually integrate with mobile money services in all these different countries. Mobile money is just like this wonderful phenomenon, it's not really a phenomenon, but a wonderful service that exists in emerging markets that lets consumers actually use their cell phone to send and receive payments. And instead of having a bank account, they just carry a balance that's tied to their SIM card, that's tied to their phone number. So in Kenya, for example, this was really the birthplace of mobile money. Many of you might have heard of M-Pesa in Kenya. M-Pesa was actually started by the dominant telecom in Kenya, where they actually built up a network of human ATMs, aka shopkeepers, across the country, where anyone could go to that shopkeeper, hand over physical cash, and put balance in their mobile money wallet. And then they could use their cell phone at any point in time and actually send that money to a business or to a family member or anyone else who also had a mobile wallet. So our tie-in of our software into these existing mobile money platforms has enabled any off-grid pay-as-you-go consumer to actually make their payment just using their phone. And that has played a big role in just reducing collections costs for distributors, eliminates fraud. It doesn't exist in all countries. There are definitely countries like India, for example, where mobile money hasn't really taken off at the end consumer level, in which case distributors are still collecting cash and we're tracking that for them. But mobile money is just a great service that's growing in a lot of these emerging markets, which is letting unbanked consumers store balance and send spin that balance through their cell phone. So that's sort of an interesting piece that you didn't really see a lot of in that video or anything.
Maybe going off of that, when you mentioned India, there's 300 million people in India alone without access to electricity, but the dynamic is definitely different than in Africa. Are you guys working in India right now? And if so, could you talk about, if you have a different strategy, how are you addressing that?
Yeah, we are working in India. Our strategy is to make it as customizable for the distributor to customize the technology to make their business work. So I'll give you one example, two examples. In India, there are kerosene subsidies across the country. So kerosene is at least 70% cheaper than it is in East Africa. And what that means is that distributors selling pay-as-you-go solar in India might have to price a week of solar much less or differently than a distributor in East Africa. So that's one way that a distributor can actually use our platform and customize their own pricing based on the local market. Another example is, in India, I don't know how many dialects there are, different languages there are, but distributors can actually customize the text in an SMS that's sent to the consumer in that local language, so they can actually communicate with whatever market they're working in. This is definitely the case in Africa as well, where there are so many local languages. So as the technology provider, we just have to make sure that our platform is flexible enough to work with different models or different geographies like that. Yeah.
You mentioned in your video, you could talk about the mobile network and how it can leapfrog the landline network. And so it seems like this would be something that could potentially, in a way, leapfrog like the entire grid system. And so has it really pushed back from entities that would be making money off of the grid, like if this was not another option, especially if the government was making money off of it?
Yeah. I would say there are smart governments and not so smart governments. The smart governments are actually incentivizing the importation and distribution of distributed solar products because they realize that that's the future. And it's much cheaper to distribute distributed solar products than actually expanding the grid. It's often much more reliable. If you take again the case in Nigeria, where the grid, is actually pretty pervasive, but super unreliable. Some governments are more progressive and they're incentivizing solar over grid expansion. So there are some countries where, for example, importing solar products, all of these products are manufactured in either China or India, and then put on a usually boat and sent to the country that they're distributed in. There are definitely countries that have really high import taxes for importing solar products, and you just see those countries years behind countries like Kenya that incentivize solar, just in terms of average wealth, off-grid percentage of population. It's really hurting their economy because they're not expanding the grid, yet they're not incentivizing alternative energy solutions.
Without the data you have based on the usage, have you been able to quantify how many emissions, I don't know what type of emissions kerosene creates, but how much using solar power or switching to solar power is saved?
Yeah. So a typical kerosene lantern will release 100 kilograms of CO2 per year per lantern. So this is actually one of the impact metrics that we look at and we measure over time is how much kerosene are we diverting from the atmosphere. Sorry, how much CO2 are we diverting from the atmosphere by replacing kerosene. It's a proxy. We can't always guarantee that they're going to drop kerosene entirely. We never know exactly how many lanterns the family had that they're giving up when they put in solar. But certainly that's our best guess, 100 kilograms per lantern per year. Yeah.
How do you choose your manufacturers and how do you make sure that, do you monitor their labor standards?
Not as much as I'd like. But we choose them, again, sort of in the same answer to the distributor question. We look at their historical performance. We get references from distributors in terms of distributors that have actually sold their products and dealt with any product failures that have happened. we make sure that rate of failures are very low. The other thing that we piggyback on is there are industry standards and certifications that off-grid solar manufacturers get in order to sort of deem their product high quality. So Lighting Global certification is one such example, and we make sure that any manufacturer we work with, their products have Lighting Global certification, which is sort of a third-party standards body that's putting these products through lifetime testing and environmental testing, and even like truth in advertising testing, making sure, you know, whatever is written on the box, like runtime, for example, is actually what the product performs, how the product performs. So we also piggyback on a lot of the like industry associations and their work there.
Ashley.
Great. Thank you so much, Lesley.
Yeah, no problem.
Let me just interject. I think like you, like per minute, you've got like more questions than any other speaker.
Good. You guys are totally asleep.
Okay, so we have, because
So
it's the
thank
last
you,
class-
thank you.
Yeah, thank you.